Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Commissioner, and today we're going back to some MLB data from 2022 using Retrosheet the play-by-play files. Today we're going to take a look at tagging up, runners tagging up, and more specifically, we're going to take a look at a couple of different cases. Runners tagging up either from first, second, or third base when they're the only runner on base. And then in addition to that, we're going to look at all sac fly chances. So if there's a runner on third with any base configuration, we'll take a look at the sac fly chances. The reason I've kind of limited it to these base situations is because I think it gives you the best pure representation of how often a runner tags up from each particular base without regard to other runners on base, really. So if there's only a runner on second, for example, those tag ups may be a little different when there's a runner on first too, because of the fact that there's another runner that the defense has to worry about. I may do another breakdown of going into a little bit more in depth on situations where there's more than one runner on base and seeing how often that trail runner tags up also, or how often they get the trail runner out, for example, or how often the trail runner either advances or gets out based on the lead runner, what happens to the lead runner. So I may do another video where I dig in a little deeper on that. If you'd like to see that, leave a comment down below and let me know. But in this video, I'm only going to focus on a single runner on base, either on first, second, or third, or all sac flies, because I think sac flies are another case where people are, I bet you're curious to know how often sac flies happen, how often the runner on third holds, and how often there's a double play, a tag up double play. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Let's get into it. All right, so let's take a look at the data here. A couple of, I always give a couple of little caveats on the information, and so let me talk about those a little bit. First of all, once again, much like the other data we've taken a look at, we only know the end result. We don't know all the other things that may have happened before the end result. We don't know how often an outfielder threw for a particular runner. So, if the runner scored, for example, from third, we don't know if it was a case where he scored and there was no throw, or whether there was an actual play at the plate and he scored. We don't know that from the play-by-play data, unfortunately. The other thing is that the data we're going to look at is a combination of all runners. So there's no accounting for speed, for runner speed. The slowest runners and the fastest runners are all lumped into this data. Obviously, the slowest runners aren't going to be, probably taking as many chances of advancing and that kind of thing as a faster runner is, but the data is just aggregated. So we don't have a breakdown by the speed of the base runners. So just something to keep in mind. These are the grand totals for all players, or all runners, regardless of their speed. So if we take a look, I broke it down by no outs and one out separately, just because I thought there might be some differences, whether there were no outs or one out. And all of these are cases where there was a fly ball out to one of the outfielders, left, center, or right. So what I did was I broke this down by across the top, you'll see the fielder. So which fielder caught the fly ball, left, center, or right. And then cross-reference that with the runner situation. So was there a runner just on first? Was there a runner just on second? Was there a runner just on third? And then all sac flies. So all sac flies would be any case where there was a runner on third base. There could be the bases loaded in that case. There could have just been a runner on third. There could have been runners on second and third, first and third. But there had to be a runner on third base that had a chance of scoring in those cases. So that was kind of the breakdown. As I said, if somebody's interested, I'll do another video where I can take a look at trail runners and that kind of thing. But for this one, I wanted to keep it a little simpler than that. So as you can see, just from the raw data, on fly balls where there were no runners on base, obviously, I didn't take a look at where there weren't any runners on because there wouldn't have been a chance to tag up in those cases. But when there were no outs, there were 1,634 cases of a flyout with a runner on first only, 537 cases where there was a flyout with a runner on second only, 71 cases where there's a flyout with a runner on third only, and 472 cases where there was a sac fly possibility, meaning there was a runner on third regardless of other runners on base, and that's with no outs. With one out, there were more cases where there was a runner on first, 2,159. More cases where just a runner was on second, 811. More cases where there was just a runner on third, 250. And more cases where there was a sac fly chance, 1105, which makes sense because with one out, there's a lot more chances that there are base runners on than if there's no outs. No outs could be the start of an inning, and so on. So it just makes more sense that there'd be more runners on base with one out than with no outs. In any event, those are the raw numbers. And then, of course, I also broke it down by percentage because it's one thing to look at the raw numbers and another thing to look at the percentages. One thing, just looking at the raw numbers that you'll notice is I broke it. There were only three possibilities. Either the runner held and didn't try to advance, or didn't advance, I should say. We don't know whether he tried or not, but he didn't advance. So he ended up on the base he was on when the flyout was made. He advanced, usually to the next base. There were very, very few cases where a runner advanced more than one base on a flyout. Almost never. And cases where there was a double play, meaning it was the fielder caught the flyout and then doubled the runner off base. Either the runner was trying to advance and got thrown out on the next base he was going to, or he got doubled off on the base he left because he maybe it was a hit and run and he left the base early. Regardless, he was doubled off the base he was on to begin with. And as you can see, as I said, there were very few cases where there was a double play on a flyout. Very, very few. And I'll talk about some of the differences here in a minute. So let's take a look at the percentages. And I've highlighted a couple that I really wanted to pay attention to. But if we just look at the percentages, we can see that overall, with a runner just on first base, the runner on first is almost always holding. Almost always. And it didn't matter whether there were no outs or one out, in the high 90s. So, on balls hit to left, almost 98% of the time with no outs. Balls hit to center, 95% of the time with no outs. Balls hit to right, almost 98% of the time. And then with one out, the numbers were also high, close to, over 97% overall. So I think we can just say that when there's a runner on first, almost never is he advancing. Very, very few cases of him advancing, just a percent or two. So almost never. And likewise, the double play chances are, as I've mentioned before, very low, less than 1% with no outs. That goes up to 1.5% with one out, but almost never. Interestingly, with a runner on first, 3/4 of the time that there was a double play, it occurred when the runner on first was didn't make it back to first on time on a flyout. So the double play ended up being the fielder to the first baseman to complete the double play. So over 3/4 of the time, there's a double play on a flyout with a runner on first only. It was because the runner, maybe it was a hit and run, whatever the case may be, it was because the runner got doubled off the base he left early from, not because he got thrown out at second. So that's one thing about runners just on first. Now, runners on second, there are some differences to note. And this is, again, runners just on second base only. First of all, you'll notice the double play percent, very low again. Very, very low again. Almost never happens. In fact, if we go back up here, we can see there were a total of 5 plays all of last year with no outs, and only 11 total with 1 out, where that runner on second base was doubled off on a flyout. And about half of those times, they were, again, the double play occurred on a throw to second base. So they were doubled off because they left the bag early. So half the time they're doubled off, they left early, and half the time they were thrown out at third. So just something interesting to note there on the raw numbers. So let's go back to percentages here. Now there is a difference between no outs and 1 outs with a runner on second. If you note that overall, over half the time, almost 60% of the time, on a flyout, the runner on second holds. But that was really dependent on which fielder the ball was hit to. So, and I think this makes total sense. 86% of the time, when the ball was hit to left, that runner on second base held. Only 12% of the time did they advance. And again, almost 1.5% of the time was there a double play involved. Now that drops way down. So on balls hit to center, now we're getting to just over 58% of the time does the runner hold, and 41% of the time they advance. So now we're talking about greatly increasing the chances that the runner's going to advance with no outs and a fly out to center field. Likewise, balls hit to right, now the percentages have flipped. And so a fly out to the right fielder with a man on second and no outs, almost 60% of the time he's advancing now. And only just over 40% of the time does he hold. So, which makes total sense because obviously third base is a lot further from right field than it is from left. So it makes sense that these percentages would go the way they are. Now, interestingly, with 1 out, the numbers change a little bit. Now, they're much more likely to hold with 1 out. So with 1 out, the ball's hit to a fielder who makes the catch for the second out, and that runner on second does not try to take third base most of the time now, where he would have with no outs. So just something interesting to look at there. So again, balls hit to left 92% of the time he's holding now. 66% of the time when the ball's hit to center. So 2/3 of the time when the ball's hit to center, he's holding. And now, balls hit to right even, whereas before, with no outs, balls were hit to right. He was advancing almost 60% of the time. Now he's holding almost 60% of the time and only advancing 40%. So now we're getting into a case where the difference between no outs and 1 outs is pretty apparent. A lot more likely to hold that runner at second base. And again, I think that's because conventional wisdom says you don't want to make the third out at third base, right? That's what I've always heard. So it seems that major league teams are actually following that guideline and not trying to advance that runner on second to third as often. So very interesting to see that. And then a runner on third only. So there's no other runners on base, just the runner on third. There are, again, differences between no outs and 1 out. We can see that with no outs, they're a little bit more likely to hold and a little bit less likely to try to score when there are no outs than when there's 1 out. And I don't know if that's because, again, with 1 out, a fly out to left, center, or right for the second out, you have a guy on third, so it makes you want to take that risk a little bit more because now there's going to be 2 outs and a man on third. Whereas if there's just 1 out and a man on third, you have a couple of chances to try to score him instead of just 1 chance to score him. So, and it's not a huge swing. It's about 5% difference. So, again, he's holding 21% of the time with no outs, and that drops to about 16.5% with 1 out. And again, scoring, he scores 77.5% of the time with no outs. That jumps up to 82.5% with 1 out. So again, I think it's a case where with a runner on third, you're more likely to, if there are no outs and that was the first out, to wait because you have a couple of chances to try to score him, as opposed to, you know, if that flyout's the second out, you're not going to have as many chances to try to score that runner in that case. So just a little bit of interesting, I think. Now finally, let's just look at sac flies overall. So again, this is a case where there is a runner on third. There could be other runners on base. There might not be. So the sac flies include the runner on third that you saw above, but they're all of the cases where there's a runner on third base, regardless of the situation. And I think, once again, interesting to note is that, again, there's almost never a double play on a sac fly. Almost never. And in these cases, we're talking about double plays, doubling off that lead runner, okay? So we're looking at what happens to the lead runner in this case, whether they hold, whether they score, whether they're doubled up, okay? So, again, almost never. However, it does go up quite a bit with 1 out, if we notice. If we come back up here to the raw numbers, we can see there were only 5 double plays with no outs out of 472 total sac flies with no outs. That number jumps up to 28 with 1 out. And if we look at the distribution, obviously they all went up. So 7 were hit to left, 6 to center, 15 to right. So way more, twice as many double plays on a sac fly involve the right fielder. And again, maybe that's because the right fielders have better arms. Traditionally, that's where you put, conventional wisdom says that that right field's where you put a guy with a great arm. So maybe that's why there's so many double plays hit to right. Just a thought. The other thing to notice is, and I think this comes up a little bit, is let's compare the left field, right field. If we look at all sac flies, we can see that they're a little bit, not a huge amount, but a little bit more likely to hold on balls hit to right than balls hit to left. Obviously, center field is further away from home plate, so the hold percentage is very low. So only 16, almost 16% of the time on balls hit to center does that runner on third hold, and the other 84% of the time he tries to score and almost always makes it. That's hit to center. So, but looking at left and right, we can see there's a little bit of a difference. So balls hit to left, they're a little less likely to hold than balls hit to right, 25.5 to 28%, and a little bit more likely to score, 73 to 70%, 73.5 to 70.5. A little bit more likely to score on balls hit to left than balls hit to right. And we see the same thing. It's even more pronounced with 1 out. So again, with 1 out, there's a fly out, which would be the second out of the inning. And so even more, the percentages have swung to trying to score in that case, which makes sense because, again, you don't want to leave that runner on third base, and you only have 1 more chance with 2 outs to try to score him. Whereas with no outs starting the at bat, you'd have 2 chances. So that makes sense. But even then, the right field and left field split here is more pronounced. So with 1 out, that fly out to left, they only hold almost less than 20% of the time. Almost 80% of the time they're scoring. Whereas balls hit to right, they're way more likely to hold. 25% of the time they're holding, even with one out. And only just over 70% of the time are they scoring. Now again, that's where those double plays come in. That's the largest chance of a double play right there. 4% is on a sac fly hit to right field. The double play chance goes up to 4%. Now, if you're trying to compute that or compare that to tabletop baseball games, 5% would be a 1 in 20 chance. So a roll of a 1 on a 20-sided die would be a 5% if it's a 20-sided die. But 4% isn't even that's not very high, not very likely. It's pretty rare. So it's just interesting. Overall, as I said, if we compare it with a runner just on third to all sac fly chances, we can see that there's a lot more double plays when there's other runners on base versus when there's only a runner on third. And again, this was only talking about doubling up the lead runner. We're not talking about trail runners at all here. We're only talking about that lead runner. So very interesting stuff. I guess for me, what I would have thought going into this was that there were, overall, like runner on first, that made sense to me. That they almost always hold, that made sense to me. But on sac flies, I guess it didn't seem in my mind, there weren't that many. It wasn't that much of a swing of runners on third trying to score on a fly out. I thought it was closer to maybe not 50-50, but I didn't think it was a 75-25 split, which overall that's what you get about roughly, give or take a few percent. So with no outs, it's a 76.5, 72.5 split of scoring. With one out, that goes up even more to like almost an 80-20 split. So that's what I think surprised me the most, was that almost, I guess, a great majority of the time, if there's a sac fly or a fly out with no outs or one out, a great majority of the time the runner on third is scoring. He's not holding very often. And so that kind of surprised me. I mean, I knew it was more often than not they scored, but I didn't think it was so skewed that way, 75-25 or 80-20 split, the way it really is. So pretty interesting stuff. Hopefully you found that interesting. Let me know if there was anything in here that surprised you. As I play tabletop baseball, I am kind of taking a look at some of these, some of what occurs, the plays that occur, and kind of comparing them to the actual data on this stuff. And I think there's definitely cases where I see differences that may need to be taken more into account. But overall, it's just something interesting to take a look at because sometimes this stuff does go against the conventional wisdom or what you would think. So it's just good sometimes to look at the actual data in these cases to see what actually occurs on these. The other thing, if you want to notice, this whatever color, the salmon color, I guess we'll call it, kind of gives you the breakdown of where balls were hit left, center, or right. So on sac flies, which makes sense. 40% of those are hit to the center fielder. 40% of the flyouts are hit to center field. A little over a quarter are hit to left, and 33 or a third of the time they're hit to right, roughly. So that's what those other percentages mean. So this is just another one of my series. I plan to do some more. I know there was another request to see how often runners go from first to third on a single, for example, or score from second on a single, or score from first on a double, for example, that kind of thing. So that's another video that I'm planning on making. But if you're curious to see tagging up, how that's affected by trail runners, or what happens to trail runners in those cases, let me know in the comments. Or if there's other data that you want me to take a look at, leave that in a comment as well, and I will put that on my list for future videos. I'm still planning on doing some of the ground ball distribution with different runner positionings, or excuse me, um, different runner situations. So I've done a runner on first, and I've done runner on first and second. I haven't done like bases loaded, which would be an interesting one to see what happens in those cases. So that might be another one that I'll do. But if there's things specifically that you're looking for in terms of data analysis, let me know. And if it's something that I can get access to, I will take a look at the play-by-play data and kind of crunch some numbers on it. It's something I think is pretty fun to do, and it's pretty interesting to take a look at. So hopefully you agree with that. If you like this kind of content, one of the things that helps me know what kind of content people enjoy is by clicking the like button. Consider subscribing if you want to make sure you don't miss any of the future data analysis videos that I put out. And if you want to take a look at my solo league, you can head over to baseballmaelstrom.com to see all of the information on that. There's currently voting open for the all-star starters in my solo league that you can take part in and vote for if you're interested in that. Likewise, I have other videos obviously on this channel where you can take a look at some recaps of the weeks as I've been playing them. So if that's something you're interested in, check that out as well. I think that's where I'll leave things. Thanks so much for watching. Love to hear those comments. And until next time, have a great evening.